Welcome. Today we look back at one of the most defining events in human history, World War II. This was a conflict that reshaped nations, transformed societies, and changed the role of the United States in the world forever. What follows is not a story of heroes and villains alone, but a record of decisions, sacrifices, and consequences that continue to shape our present. This is the story of World War II. P-51 Mustang, the fighter that changed the course of the air war. When the United States entered World War II, it possessed bombers capable of reaching deep into enemy territory, but it lacked a fighter that could truly protect them. American bombers flew farther than ever before, yet they did so alone for much of the journey. German fighters waited beyond escort range, tearing formations apart with deadly efficiency. By late 1943, the strategic bombing campaign over Europe was close to failure. The solution would come from an aircraft that was never meant to become a legend. The P-51 Mustang began as an emergency project. In 1940, Britain urgently needed new fighter aircraft and approached American manufacturers for help. North American Aviation responded with a radical proposal. Instead of producing an existing design, they would create a completely new fighter in record time. Skepticism was high, but desperation outweighed doubt. Engineers worked at unprecedented speed. From concept to first flight took just over 100 days. The original Mustang design was promising but limited. Early versions performed well at low altitude but struggled higher up, where air combat over Europe was decided. For a time, the aircraft was used primarily for reconnaissance and ground attack. It showed speed, range, and handling, but it was not yet the machine that would change the war. Everything changed with one decision: replacing its engine. British engineers suggested installing the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that gave the Spitfire its high-altitude performance. When the Mustang flew with the Merlin, the transformation was dramatic. Speed increased, climb rate improved. High-altitude performance matched or exceeded German fighters. Combined with its laminar flow wing and exceptional range, the Mustang became something no other Allied aircraft was: a long-range escort fighter that could fight and win anywhere in the sky. For the first time, American bombers would not be abandoned over enemy territory. By early 1944, P-51s began arriving in large numbers with the 8th Air Force in England. Their presence changed everything. Instead of flying defensively close to bomber formations, Mustang pilots were ordered to range freely. They hunted German fighters aggressively, attacking them as they took off, as they climbed, and even on the ground. The air war shifted from defense to destruction. The effect on German morale and capability was devastating. The Luftwaffe could no longer choose when to fight. Experienced pilots were lost at unsustainable rates. Fuel shortages limited training. Aircraft production struggled under constant bombing. Within months, German air superiority, once feared across Europe, began to collapse. For bomber crews, the Mustang became a symbol of survival. Seeing silver fighters weaving above formations changed morale instantly. Losses dropped. Missions that once felt suicidal became survivable. The Flying Fortress could now focus on bombing, not merely staying alive. The P-51 Mustang was not just another fighter. It was the missing piece in a strategy that depended on air dominance. It allowed the Allies to control the skies before D-Day, to protect armies after landing, and to cripple Germany's ability to resist from the air. But its story was not just one of technology and tactics. It was a story of pilots who flew deep into enemy territory, alone and far from safety. It was a story of speed, aggression, and relentless pressure. It was the story of how air superiority was finally won. The Mustang would become one of the most feared and respected fighters of World War II. And this was only the beginning. Into the heart of Germany, early escort missions, and the breaking of the Luftwaffe. When the P-51 Mustang began escorting American bombers in early 1944, the air war over Europe entered a new and brutal phase. For the first time, German pilots realized that the bombers they had once attacked with near impunity were no longer alone. The Mustangs did not merely accompany the bomber streams, they hunted. And they hunted deep inside German airspace, far beyond anything the Luftwaffe had faced before. Early escort missions revealed just how dramatic the shift had been. Mustangs flew alongside B-17 and B-24 formations all the way to central Germany and back. Where earlier fighters had been forced to turn back due to fuel limits, the P-51 stayed. Its long range meant German pilots could no longer wait for bombers to reach unprotected zones. Every mile of the route was now dangerous. American commanders deliberately changed tactics. Mustang pilots were encouraged to abandon rigid defensive patterns and engage the enemy aggressively. Instead of staying glued to bombers, they flew ahead of the formations, attacking German fighters as they climbed to altitude. Airfields became targets. Fighters were destroyed before they could even reach the bombers. The Luftwaffe was dragged into constant combat on American terms. For German pilots, the change was devastating. Many were young and poorly trained, rushed into service as losses mounted. Fuel shortages limited flight hours. Veteran pilots were forced into repeated engagements, flying multiple sorties per day against an enemy that was faster, longer ranged, and increasingly confident. Losses became unsustainable. The Mustang itself proved deadly in combat. Its speed allowed pilots to choose when to fight and when to disengage. Its maneuverability at high altitude matched or exceeded that of German fighters. The 650 caliber machine guns delivered devastating firepower. Mustang pilots learned quickly that patience and discipline mattered as much as aggression. One clean pass could end a fight in seconds. The psychological impact was just as important as the physical destruction. German pilots knew that even if they survived an engagement, they would face Mustangs again on the next mission, and the next. The sense of control they once held over the skies vanished. German fighter groups were slowly ground down, aircraft and pilots lost in a war of attrition they could not win. For American bomber crews, the effect was immediate and tangible. Loss rates dropped sharply. Missions that once resulted in dozens of bombers lost now returned with most formations intact. Crews still faced flak and danger, but the constant fear of fighter attack diminished. Morale soared. The presence of Mustangs overhead became a promise. Someone was watching their backs. By the spring of 1944, the Luftwaffe was in crisis. Aircraft production could not keep pace with losses. Training programs shortened drastically. Pilots were sent into combat with minimal experience. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft. Even when planes were available, there were fewer skilled men left to fly them. The destruction of the Luftwaffe was not immediate or dramatic. It was systematic. Mission by mission, escort by escort, the Mustangs drained German air power away. The sky over Europe became increasingly hostile for anyone wearing a German uniform. This transformation had consequences far beyond air combat. With German air defenses weakened, Allied bombers struck factories, oil refineries, and transportation networks with growing effectiveness. Air superiority became the foundation for the invasion of Western Europe. Without the Mustang, D-Day would have faced catastrophic risk from enemy aircraft. The P-51 did not simply escort bombers. It destroyed the enemy's ability to fight back. It turned the skies over Germany from a killing ground for bombers into a battlefield the Allies controlled. The air war had reached its turning point, and the Mustang was now at the center of it. The aces, dogfights, and life as a Mustang pilot. Flying the P-51 Mustang was unlike flying any other fighter of World War II. For the pilots who climbed into its cockpit, the war was fast, lonely, and unforgiving. Mustang pilots often operated far ahead of bomber formations, deep inside enemy territory, with no guarantee of support if something went wrong. Their survival depended on skill, discipline, and an aircraft that could both fight and escape. Dogfights in the Mustang were violent and brief. Combat rarely resembled the swirling duels described in popular imagination. Most engagements were decided in seconds. Pilots spotted the enemy, positioned for advantage, fired, and either scored a kill or disengaged. Hesitation was fatal. German fighters like the Bf-109 and Fw-190 were dangerous opponents, but the Mustang's speed and high-altitude performance allowed American pilots to control the terms of engagement. They could dive, strike, and climb away before the enemy could respond. The long range of the P-51 created a new kind of psychological pressure. Pilots flew missions that lasted 5 or 6 hours, much of it alone over hostile territory. Engine failure meant capture or death. Bailout often meant landing among enemy civilians or military units. Many pilots were captured after being shot down, spending the remainder of the war as prisoners. Others did not survive the descent. The concept of the ace emerged naturally from this environment. Pilots who achieved 5 or more confirmed kills were celebrated in newspapers and propaganda. Yet the reality behind ace status was complex. Many aces survived because of experience and caution as much as aggression. Others accumulated victories quickly and were killed soon after. The skies over Europe did not reward recklessness for long. American aces such as George Preddy, Don Gentile, and Bud Anderson became symbols of the Mustang's effectiveness. Their successes were real, but they were also products of teamwork, intelligence, and overwhelming Allied numbers. Behind every ace stood maintenance crews, intelligence officers, radar operators, and fellow pilots who protected each other in the air. Daily life for Mustang pilots alternated between boredom and terror. Hours of cruising at altitude were punctuated by moments of sudden violence. The cockpit was cramped, loud, and cold. Oxygen masks were worn constantly. Hands froze inside gloves. Sweat froze into ice. The engine's vibration became a constant companion, its sound both reassuring and ominous. Combat stress accumulated quickly. Pilots watched friends fail to return from missions. Empty chairs appeared in mess halls without explanation. Briefings began with lists of missing men. Replacement pilots arrived regularly, often young and inexperienced, thrown into combat with little time to adjust. Veterans tried to pass on survival tips, knowing that luck played as much a role as skill. Despite the danger, Mustang pilots developed confidence in their aircraft. The P-51 was fast, responsive, and forgiving when handled correctly. It could absorb damage and still bring its pilot home. Stories circulated of Mustangs returning with holes through wings and fuselage, engines damaged, control surfaces barely functioning. Each successful return reinforced belief in the machine. The Mustang also changed the mentality of air combat. American pilots were no longer reactive defenders. They were hunters. They attacked enemy aircraft wherever they could find them, including on the ground. Strafing runs destroyed parked fighters, fuel trucks, and airfields. These missions were dangerous, exposing pilots to ground fire, but they further crippled German air power. The legacy of the Mustang. Why this aircraft changed the war forever. When historians look back at World War II and ask which aircraft most decisively altered the course of the air war over Europe, the answer is remarkably consistent. It is not the largest bomber, the fastest jet, or the most heavily armed machine. It is the P-51 Mustang, a fighter that arrived late, adapted quickly, and changed everything. The Mustang's greatest achievement was not the number of enemy aircraft it destroyed, though that number was enormous. Its true impact lay in what it enabled. Before the Mustang, American bombers could reach deep into Germany, but they could not survive there consistently. After the Mustang, they could. This single change shifted the strategic balance of the war. German industry, fuel production, transportation networks, and aircraft factories were no longer protected by distance. The heart of the Reich was exposed day after day. By destroying the Luftwaffe as a fighting force, the Mustang did more than win air battles. It removed Germany's ability to resist Allied invasion. When Allied troops landed in Normandy, they did so under skies largely free of enemy aircraft. When armies advanced across France and into Germany, they moved with air cover that denied the enemy freedom of movement. The collapse of German air power accelerated the collapse of German ground forces. The chain reaction was clear and irreversible. The Mustang also redefined what a fighter aircraft could be. Its combination of speed, range, firepower, and handling created a new standard. Long-range escort was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a proven reality. Future air forces around the world took note. Post-war fighter doctrine would always assume that range and endurance mattered as much as raw performance. The Mustang made global air operations possible. Yet the legacy of the P-51 cannot be measured only in strategy and doctrine. It lives in the human stories attached to the aircraft. Thousands of pilots trusted their lives to the Mustang in moments when there was no margin for error. They flew alone over enemy territory, fought outnumbered, and returned damaged machines across hostile skies. Some never returned. Others survived by seconds or meters. Their experiences shaped a generation. For many pilots, the Mustang represented freedom and danger in equal measure. It was fast enough to escape death and powerful enough to bring it. It demanded respect. Mishandled, it could kill its pilot as easily as the enemy could. Mastered, it offered survival in the most unforgiving environment imaginable. That balance created a bond between man and machine that few aircraft have ever inspired. After the war, the Mustang's life continued in new forms. It served in air forces around the world, flew in later conflicts, and found new roles in racing and civilian aviation. Its shape became iconic. Its sound became instantly recognizable. Decades later, when a restored Mustang flies at an air show, crowds still fall silent. People look up not just at an airplane, but at history in motion. The P-51 Mustang stands as a reminder that victory in war is rarely achieved by a single invention or moment. It is achieved when the right tool arrives at the right time. guided by people willing to use it under extreme pressure. The Mustang did not win the war alone, but without it, the war would have been longer, bloodier, and far less certain. World War II was a conflict defined by industry, ideology, and sacrifice. The Mustang embodied all three. It was born from industrial urgency, shaped by tactical necessity, and flown by men who accepted extraordinary risk. Its success shortened the war in Europe and saved countless lives on the ground by winning control of the air. Today, the P-51 Mustang is remembered not simply as a fighter aircraft, but as a turning point. It represents the moment when the Allies took permanent command of the skies and never gave it back. It symbolizes how innovation, adaptation, and courage can alter the course of history. The Mustang's story is not just about speed or firepower. It is about timing. It arrived when it was needed most. It performed when failure was not an option. And it helped bring one of the darkest chapters in human history to an end. The P-51 Mustang did not just fly in World War II. It changed how World War II was fought and how it was won. The combination of long-range escort and aggressive tactics reshaped the air war. German pilots could no longer conserve strength or choose their battles. They were forced to fight constantly or surrender control of the skies entirely. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was exhausted. For Mustang pilots, survival meant constant vigilance. Even as Allied victory approached, the danger never disappeared. Many were killed in the final months of the war, shot down by flak, or caught by desperate enemy pilots. The war ended suddenly, but for those who flew the Mustang, its intensity never faded. The P-51 did not make its pilots invincible. It made them effective. And in doing so, it helped bring air superiority to the Allies. One mission, one dogfight, one decision at a time. D-Day and the invasion of Europe, the Mustang clears the skies. By the spring of 1944, the Allied invasion of Western Europe was approaching. Operation Overlord depended on one critical condition. The Allies had to control the air. Without air superiority, landing forces on the beaches of Normandy would face devastating attacks from German aircraft. The responsibility for ensuring that control fell heavily on fighter units flying the P-51 Mustang. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, Mustang squadrons flew relentless missions over France, Belgium, and Western Germany. Their objectives expanded beyond escorting bombers. They attacked rail lines, bridges, radar stations, communication hubs, and airfields. Every destroyed train and damaged runway reduced Germany's ability to respond to the coming invasion. The air war became a systematic effort to isolate the battlefield before a single soldier landed in France. Mustang pilots flew low-altitude strafing missions that were among the most dangerous of the war. Diving toward airfields and transport columns exposed them to intense ground fire. Anti-aircraft guns, machine guns, and even small arms fire could bring down a fighter in seconds. Losses were significant, but the effect was decisive. German aircraft were destroyed on the ground faster than they could be replaced. Fuel depots burned. Communications collapsed. On June 6, 1944, P-51s were in the air before dawn. As Allied troops crossed the English Channel, Mustang squadrons patrolled above them, ensuring that German aircraft could not interfere with the landings. The Luftwaffe attempted to respond, but it was largely absent. Years of attrition had left Germany with too few aircraft, too little fuel, and too few experienced pilots. Those who did take off were often intercepted almost immediately. Throughout D-Day and the days that followed, Mustangs flew constant patrols over the beaches and inland routes, They attacked troop movements, armored columns, and supply convoys trying to reach Normandy. German units attempting to move by daylight were exposed to immediate attack. Roads became death traps. Reinforcements were delayed or destroyed before reaching the front. The invasion force was protected by a shield of air power that the enemy could not penetrate. As Allied armies pushed inland, the role of the P-51 evolved again. Mustang pilots provided close air support, striking enemy positions just ahead of advancing ground troops. They coordinated with forward air controllers, responding rapidly to calls for help. This close cooperation saved countless lives on the ground by suppressing enemy fire and disrupting counterattacks. The psychological impact on German forces was profound. Soldiers reported that movement during daylight was nearly impossible. Any column spotted from the air risked immediate destruction. Morale suffered as troops felt hunted from above. The absence of effective German air cover reinforced the sense that the war was turning decisively against them. For Mustang pilots, the tempo of operations increased dramatically after D-Day. Missions were flown daily, sometimes multiple times per day. Fatigue accumulated. Aircraft required constant maintenance. Ground crews worked around the clock to keep fighters operational. The intensity of the air campaign matched the intensity of the ground battle unfolding below. The success of the invasion validated years of sacrifice in the air war. Without the Mustang and the air superiority it helped achieve, Allied forces would have faced far greater losses on the beaches and inland. The skies over Normandy belonged to the Allies, and that control was decisive. D-Day marked the moment when the P-51 proved its value beyond escort missions. It was no longer just a guardian of bombers. It was an instrument of battlefield dominance, shaping the outcome of the invasion hour by hour. As Allied forces broke out of Normandy and advanced toward Germany, the Mustang followed them eastward. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted permanently. The next phase would push the P-51 into the final brutal months of combat, fighting an enemy that was collapsing, but still deadly. Hunter-killer. The Mustang. Turns. On Germany's ground. War after the breakout from Normandy, the nature of the air war over Western Europe changed again. The German army was retreating, but it was far from defeated. Columns of troops, tanks, trucks, and artillery moved constantly, trying to regroup behind rivers and defensive lines. Cutting these movements became a priority. The P-51 Mustang, once focused on escort and air superiority, now became one of the most feared ground attack aircraft of the war. Mustang pilots began flying aggressive strafing and attack missions across France, Belgium, and later Germany itself. These missions were fundamentally different from high-altitude escort work. Instead of cruising above bomber formations, pilots flew low and fast, often just meters above the ground. At these altitudes, the Mustang's speed was both an advantage and a risk. There was little time to react. One mistake meant hitting the ground. German roads became targets. Convoys attempting to move during daylight were hunted relentlessly. Pilots attacked trucks carrying fuel and ammunition, armored vehicles, trains, and horse-drawn wagons. A single Mustang could cripple an entire column in minutes. Exploding fuel trucks blocked roads, trapping vehicles behind them. Panic spread as units scattered for cover that often did not exist. Railways were another priority. Bridges, locomotives, and rail yards were attacked repeatedly. German logistics, already weakened by strategic bombing, began to collapse completely. Units at the front ran out of fuel and ammunition. Tanks were abandoned because they could not be moved. Artillery was left behind. The German army's ability to maneuver disintegrated under constant air pressure. These ground attack missions were among the most dangerous Mustang pilots flew. Low-altitude exposed aircraft to intense ground fire. Anti-aircraft guns, machine guns, and even rifles could bring down a fighter. German troops learned quickly to fire at Mustangs whenever they appeared. Pilots reported streams of tracer fire reaching up toward them as they made attack runs. Losses increased even as German air resistance faded. Despite the danger, the effectiveness was undeniable. Allied ground commanders quickly realized the value of having Mustangs overhead. Air attacks softened defenses before assaults and shattered counterattacks before they could form. Mustang pilots often described watching German units scatter the moment aircraft appeared, even before firing began. The psychological impact was as powerful as the physical destruction. The Mustang's design made it well suited for this role. Its speed allowed it to strike suddenly and escape quickly. Its 650 caliber machine guns delivered devastating fire against soft targets and lightly armored vehicles. Pilots learned to make multiple passes, adjusting angles and timing to maximize damage while minimizing exposure. As Allied armies advanced toward the German border, Mustangs crossed the Rhine and penetrated deep into Germany itself. Airfields, supply depots, and troop concentrations were attacked daily. By this stage of the war, German fighter opposition was minimal, but flak remained deadly. Pilots learned to recognize flak positions by the black bursts and avoid lingering over targets longer than necessary. The cumulative effect of these missions was catastrophic for Germany. Movement by day became nearly impossible. Units were forced to move at night, slowing operations and increasing confusion. Command and control broke down. Soldiers described feeling constantly hunted, unable to rest or regroup. The battlefield belonged to the Allies, and the Mustang was one of the primary reasons why. For pilots, these missions were exhausting. Flying multiple sorties per day, navigating unfamiliar terrain, and facing constant fire took a heavy toll. Many pilots were killed in the final months of the war, even as victory approached. The risk never disappeared simply because the enemy was retreating. The transformation of the P-51 into a hunter-killer marked its final evolution in Europe. It had begun as an escort fighter, become a dominant air superiority machine, and now finished as a weapon of total battlefield control. By denying the enemy the ability to move, resupply, or reorganize, the Mustang helped accelerate the collapse of Nazi Germany. The war was nearing its end, but for the pilots flying low over hostile territory, every mission remained a gamble with death. 2 chapters remained: the final months of combat and what came after. The final months: victory in sight and the last combat flights. By early 1945, the war in Europe was clearly nearing its end, but for P-51 Mustang pilots, the danger had not diminished. In many ways, the final months were among the most lethal. German air power was largely broken, yet flak remained intense, ground fire was constant, and desperation drove the enemy to fight with everything that remained. Victory was visible on maps, but survival was still uncertain on every mission. As Allied armies crossed into Germany, Mustang squadrons followed closely. Missions were flown daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Pilots escorted bombers, striking the last remaining industrial targets, while also providing direct support to ground forces pushing through the Reich. The pace was relentless. Fatigue accumulated rapidly. Aircraft required constant maintenance, and ground crews worked through nights to keep fighters operational. German fighter resistance had largely collapsed, but it had not vanished entirely. Small numbers of jets, including the Me-262, began appearing. These aircraft were faster than any Allied fighter and posed a serious threat to bombers. Mustang pilots adapted quickly, attacking jet bases during takeoff and landing, when the Me-262 was most vulnerable. Strafing runs against airfields destroyed aircraft on the ground before they could be used. The jet threat was real, but it arrived too late and in too few numbers to change the outcome of the war. Flak became the primary killer. Anti-aircraft guns protected bridges, cities, river crossings, and troop concentrations. Low-level attack missions exposed Mustangs to intense fire. Pilots described black bursts filling the sky and tracers rising from fields and rooftops. Aircraft were hit without warning. Some pilots were killed instantly. Others managed to nurse damaged planes back to friendly lines, engines failing, controls barely responding. The psychological burden of these final missions was unique. Pilots knew the war was almost over. They had survived months of combat, watched friends die, and endured constant stress. The thought of being killed days or weeks before victory was unbearable, yet unavoidable. Many pilots later recalled these missions as the hardest, not because of enemy strength, but because of the weight of knowing how close the end was. Despite exhaustion, discipline held. Squadrons continued flying until ordered to stop. Targets were struck with precision. German movement was suppressed to the very end. The Mustang's presence over Germany ensured that retreating forces could not reorganize or counterattack effectively. The air belonged to the Allies completely. In April 1945, as Allied armies closed in on Berlin, Mustang pilots reported flying over landscapes of total destruction. Cities lay in ruins. Smoke rose from countless fires. Roads were clogged with refugees and retreating soldiers. The scale of collapse was unmistakable. Some pilots described the experience as flying over the end of a world. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered. For Mustang pilots, the announcement came suddenly. Aircraft that had been armed and fueled for missions were grounded. Orders World War II reshaped the world we live in today. Its victories, losses, and lessons remind us of the cost of global conflict and the value of cooperation. By remembering this history, we honor those who lived through it and better understand the world they left behind. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.